good life is what I'm living now. But I think if we got to get a more theoretical, or I think you were talking before we started recording about giving people something that they can actually use in addition to stories. I think it came from Freud. You need work and love in your life, and I think those are the two things that are critical to living well.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Carol Pierson Holding. Carol is an environmental writer. Her commentary on climate change ran from 2011 to 2018 in the Huffington Post and was syndicated in 200 plus environmental outlets and news websites such as the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, and Salon. Her essays have been published in the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Jose Mercury News, and Medium, among others. And her fiction has appeared in literary journals and anthologies, including the award-winning Borderland 6, the anthology of imaginative fiction. Hi, Carol. How are you doing?
Hey, Broderick, glad to be here.
Awesome. That's good to know because I am also excited to have this conversation with you, exploring the good life or versions of, or at least your personal story behind what it means to live well and what the good life is. Now, I know I just gave that brief introduction to who you are, but I always like to ask guests to share how you like to be introduced organically, a little bit more organically. So have at it. Who are you, Carol?
Well, it's interesting because your introduction started in 2011. And of course, I'm much older than I started working way before 2011. And I think that I hearken back to the something I read. I'm not even sure it's true, but I read that in Italy, you can have a marriage that lasts for 20 years until your child reaches majority, becomes 18, and then you have to remarry to reconfirm that you still want to be married to that person. I think you live two different lives, whether you stay with the same person or not. You're just very different after your children are grown. It's a second or third stage of life, I think they call it, with childhood being the first, and then early adulthood being the second, and then maturity being the third.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So yeah, you're a person with you who've lived many different lives. I guess we all
Indeed.
have in different respects. So I hope we explore those different lives and see how those different lives have shaped and influenced your perspective on living well. So let's jump right on into that. What is living well to you, or what is the good life to you?
The good life is what I'm living now. But I think if we got to get a more theoretical, or I think you were talking before we started recording about giving people something that they can actually use in addition to stories. I think it came from Freud. You need work and love in your life, and I think those are the two things that are critical to living well. Of course, the definition of those changes because work when you're in uh, your adulthood is means making money, sort of above all else, because you have to support yourself and your family, and then of course when you retire, when you get to the age of retirement, I should say, because I don't think nobody I know is actually retired. Um, Anyway, when you get to the age of retirement, it changes and it becomes much more important that you have a purpose and that there's creativity, not in your life, but really as a focus, some kind of creativity, whether it's starting something new, a nonprofit, becoming a volunteer, or in my case, writing full time. That was my leap for that. Love also, I think, changes throughout your life, and I think that a lot of people, including me, when you have children, they sort of become the focus for your love and even for your affection. You bounce around with your children, you giggle, you hug them all the time, and it becomes a substitute. And I think that's why in Italy, if that's even true, people do have that opportunity to walk away from that life when that life no longer exists because the children are gone. But
Mm,
uh, yeah, so creativity and purpose and love and always love.
awesome. That's really beautiful. I think, yeah, I would like to unpack that a little bit more. I also like how you said in the very beginning, like I'm living my best life now. I'm living a good life now. Can you say a little bit more about that? And I know we will unpack those other things that you just mentioned for sure, but I would like to hear a little bit more if you don't mind. What do you mean by you're living a good life right now?
I would love to quote a woman I read about this morning who said it so eloquently. And of course, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she said that when after her husband died, the article is about her finding a new apartment. One of those regular features in the New York Times where they interview somebody while they're going through the search process for a new apartment and help them, and then you get to vote on which one you think they should buy, and then you get to vote on what you think they actually bought. And she said, I became the person I truly was after my husband died. And I think that's sort of in my case it was divorce, but that and it happened at the same time as I realized a lot of things about my work life that I didn't like. And so I was able to change everything all at once. And I moved from New York, from Manhattan, from the Upper West Side, to an island north of Seattle, and from a man who was very, very much whose goals we had in common, to a man whose what we have in common it really is love. And it's a different way of interacting with a human being, and it's one that's absolutely, totally appropriate for this stage of life. I'm not sure if I had been with this man earlier in my life, as I was when I was very young, if it would have worked out, because we had totally different goals for our lives. And now
Mm,
the goals don't matter now. It's living in the present, and that's what we're very good at doing.
awesome. Awesome. I love how that came back to love.
Yeah.
That's one of your primary aspects of attributes of the good life for you or living well for you.
Hmm.
Back to love, and you as you mentioned those different stages of life. You've gone through uh, phases of, I would say, desire, phases of things that you really wanted in life that you really focused your attention on, and
Hmm.
at this stage of your life, you realize like there's something else that's more important, and
Hmm.
it's this love thing, and it's being present. That's awesome. Yeah, can we say a little bit more about uh, work and the role of work in and how that can what role does that play? I know you said work and love and an idea of work changes again through those various stages. Um, so can you say a little bit more about that?
Uh, I was very focused. Well, I'll go back even further since you're willing to listen to my stories. When I was young, I was fixated on the idea of fairness. And of course, it comes from an unhappy childhood. And I thought if I could find a world that was fair, that all my problems would be solved. And so what I found was free markets and capitalism, and that was a place. And we all know better now, but in its absolute theoretical purity, capitalism is a very fair system. And so that became my guiding light for many, many years. And uh, so the work that I did was I started my own firm. I became an entrepreneur, and after going to business school, and I did that for a long time, for 20 plus years. And uh, anyway, I can't give up the idea of work, of producing something, because that's built into, I think, most human beings. And but to be able to do that in the lane of creativity, in that it feeds your soul in a way that is so powerful. And I think that's what also allows me to love, because there's no, I don't feel that there's anything that I'm having to change myself for. I'm accepted in my work. Of course, it doesn't pay very much, but I'm accepted there, and I'm valued for who I am in the same way that I am in love. And so I think the two go together. I think if I were working, as I said before, if I were working in the capitalist world, if I were running my own firm, I don't think this relationship would work either, because it takes a lot of time and effort to care for a relationship, and it's hard to do that unless you're sharing goals. It's hard to do that just by being kind to each other. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it's I think it's the truth.
No, it doesn't sound terrible. I think that you're onto something there, and I think it's how you're defining work. I think you're yeah producing something, but it's the work action, meaningful action that has there's something behind what you're doing. And when you were younger, it was different. I think I guess it's fair to say you still care about fairness, right?
Yes, thank you. Good call.
Okay. Yeah. So it's fair to say that you still care about fairness, but the way that you act on that is different than what it was before. Your perspective, your views have evolved, have changed, and you still value um, action, action that leads to producing something. It doesn't have to be a
Mhm.
material thing, but it's producing something, and it could be just producing uh, a way of being in the world or producing work through your I'm saying work, but producing
That's what they
I
call it
get
in the writing world. They call it work.
okay, yeah,
They
all
say,
right.
we, how's your work going? It's
Exactly.
all work. And
Exactly.
work is not bad. But I wanted to say something about leaving the fairness. I didn't leave the fairness. I left the capitalism. Um,
Gotcha. I
I
know.
call myself a lapsed capitalist because I still like the markets, but I see that there it is flawed, and I think it's especially flawed for women, because it's a system set up by men, and I think women entering it is a good thing, but I think the structure is still very male. So that's
Hmm.
that's that's what I left. I didn't leave. I didn't leave fairness.
I know. Yeah, and so I think that having that core theme, that fairness, and in there, and also I'm glad that you can say, quote unquote, you left capitalism, but you still think that there's value in the market. Is that true? Do you still think that there is some capacity for uh, goodness and well living that the markets that capitalism can provide? Some aspects of capitalism, I should say. Do you think that that's possible still?
I do, especially looked at it from an environmental perspective. A lot of people think that it's entrepreneurship that's going to solve the climate crisis, not solve it, but contribute to the solutions that will ameliorate the climate problems.
Hmm.
Is that not backing off? I think in my in the series that I did on climate for Huffington Post and others, I did a lot of success stories about companies in the capitalist system using the profit motive to further the environment. And one of them was that just stands out is IKEA. They have those massive buildings. They put solar panels on them and paid for all of their or generated all the electricity they use to run their stores and their warehouses. So there are really easy solutions that are I shouldn't say easy. There are solutions out there that can be solved using capital and using the spirit of entrepreneurship. And I have a bunch of
Yeah.
other examples too. That was really my favorite part of writing when I found that. I would say about half muckraking and half being a booster.
Awesome. So yeah, I think that because I think that's important. I asked you that question because I think I know what you mean by the problems with capitalism. But sometimes I try to be careful with my words about capitalism and about the negative aspects of it. And to be honest, I think that those negative aspects, not in capitalism itself, like you say, what drew you to it ideally was like, oh, ideally, this makes complete sense that if this happens, but it only makes sense that that's going to work that way perfectly. Let's just say that is that you need to have a well developed, you have to have humans that are morally well developed, I should say. You have to have pretty evolved human beings, ethically evolved, and be really clear, in order for it to be to capitalism to work perfectly. Because when we are not evolved ethically or morally, when we say, for instance, that we are on the extreme a sociopath, we can still be a capitalist and seek profits and not care about the well-being of others, and willing to do anything to take care of ourselves. And so that's when capitalism can be used in a way that creates more suffering in the world versus
Yeah.
capitalism being used in a way to enhance fairness in the world, to use the thing that you're motivated by. I just think that that's an important clarity to make about it. It's not the idea is not perfect. No set of ideas are perfect. I don't think in any system of economics are perfect. But even with that imperfect idea of capitalism, the important thing is the character of the human beings who are going to apply it, who are going to use it as a tool.
I would
So
actually
yeah,
go further and say we have to assume human beings are corruptible and put guardrails on capitalism.
bingo.
I was really supportive of the American system over the European in my early days, and now I see that regulated capitalism is really the only way to prevent things like the trillionaires that are happening now at the expense of other people. It comes from somewhere, those trillions of dollars they're making, and I think we
Yeah.
have actually the first trillionaire. Am I right about that? I think
No, we're getting
Amazon
there.
was created. Jeff Bezos is the first trillionaire. I'm not sure.
No.
Anyway, probably not.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just the guardrails I think that are essential.
Exactly. I'm glad we got cleared that up. I just wanted to take a few moments to say that because I think sometimes there are lots of arguments about that, and I think that's important because it can be used to facilitate the good, but it also can be used, as we see, to cause lots of damage and harm in the world.
Yes, indeed.
And I think, and that's related to this thing that you brought, another thing that you brought up, which was that you slipped in there, you know, relationships. Can you say a little bit more about relationships and what role does relationships to others play in your view of the good life or the living well? Just elaborate. I know you said some things, but I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more.
When I was younger, I really focused on things I think a lot of people do at that age, which is the number of relationships that you have, so that you can, at the small end, have a party, a big party, and at the greater end, so that you can build a business, which I did. And in that stage, it's very important that you have many relationships. And as I've gotten older, I spend a lot more time on the ones that are important to me and my family specifically, and my good friends, Cynthia Figgy being one of them. Um, and anyway, so I think it's the quantity changes, and the other thing is that the quality changes. I recognize now when I'm phoning it in and when I'm being really present and really listening. It's interesting. A friend had a sign up by her computer that was something like it said something like fuck it and fake it or something like that. And we had she ran into health problems, and it now reads listen. So the more you go through in life, the more things boil down to their essence, the more you get to what's really important. And it's such a relief. People who are worried about retiring or about getting old, I'm here to tell you it is it is just a wonderful experience. I mean, for every loss in functionality, you gain so much more in the important things, in values, in like compassion and your ability to be compassionate and your ability to listen and be there and help and care. So uh, that's and I hear myself and I can't believe I'm saying these things because it's been relatively recently that I was a hard ass entrepreneur, very driven and very goal oriented, and now I just like to write a novel. Although I'm beginning to feel like that episode I think of some sitcom where Brooke Shields plays a woman who is incredibly talented writer, but her dream is to be a ballet dancer, and she's the clumsiest person you've ever seen, and the whole episode is around people trying to convince her to become a writer and not a ballet dancer. And I think my forte is in essays and short stories and may not be in writing a novel, but I'm not giving up, Broderick. I'm not giving up. I have my purpose anyway. So
Awesome. You're driven. That's great. Having drive is an
right,
important piece of
right,
the puzzle, right?
right.
Yeah. I like how you brought up when I asked you about relationships, you brought up compassion. I don't know if you say kindness or not, but I glean kindness from that.
Yes,
These
yeah.
positive qualities that pertain to relating to another individual. So it's not just having relationships, like you said, it's not just the quantity of those relationships, but it's the qualitative experience of those relationships. And it's not even just a qualitative experience of those relationships in terms of how you feel, because you mentioned some of that, but you were referring to how do I have an impact on another? Because to
Hmm.
be compassionate means that you're thinking about the well-being of another. To be kind, you're thinking about the well-being of another. I just think that's amazing because the good life is not just centered around ourselves. You're reminding us. It's not just me and my skin. There is more to the good life. There's more to living well than my own personal um, joy, which is important. But you're reminding us that you're feeling pretty good at this phase and stage of your life, and saying that this is great right now, and at the same time talking about kindness and compassion towards others. You're
Hmm.
able to give more of your self to others at this phase of your life in a way that's different than it was when you were doing the your work as an entrepreneur, which was still good work. It's just like you said, it's qualitative, and it's hard to you can't quantify that really, and it's something that is that that uh, that you're pointing to in the words that you're choosing to use to talk about it. Is that
You can't quantify it, Broderick, but you can get anecdotal evidence. And
exactly?
my biggest point about anecdotal evidence is that recently my sister had a health scare and she called me for help. And she's younger, and this is the first time ever she's called me
Mm,
for help. So something in me has changed. The other thing is that my daughter used to call me mom, and now she calls me mama. And that to me is a huge, huge leap too. I think
mm.
your listeners who are parents know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I love it. So work and relationships and basically love is embedded in compassion and kindness towards others, and that feeling the love from your daughter by calling you mama. I don't have kids, but I can imagine what that's like
Well,
as a
and she started doing it at like 28, so
mm,
it was a hard slog to get there.
right. I understand, and I feel that as a child of parents and
Hmm.
seeing how my affection towards them. has evolved as I have evolved and developed, and I can feel it from that end. Like, yeah, mama, I get it. You know, that love, that
You call
tenderness
your mother
towards your
mama?
parent. Oh yeah,
Oh, good, good, good,
for
good,
sure.
good. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So love and work and kindness. Where did this come from? You kind of mentioned it in your story, but I'd like to unpack that story because I think there's value in understanding how a person has come to see things the way that they have. You know, share as much as you comfortably would like, of course. Where does this
I
come from, you think?
I have to hearken back to my mother, who believed that kindness was weakness, and I mean, she really believed
Mm,
that all those values of compassion and kindness made you weak, made you vulnerable to other people. And so, with that kind of background, I entered the world as a, what is it? Kick first, take name. Anyway, just as I referred to myself as an asshole, and so it's been a lot of work, and I always thought um, I never understood why people would bother with that, and so it's been a long, hard travail. It started, I think, when my father was dying, and I went to take care of him, and I went, and he lived on a trout stream in the Catskill Mountains, and he and I would take long walks every day. And one day I took a slightly different walk through a marsh, through the side of a marsh. And as I was walking, there was a huge splash, really frightening. And I knew there were hunters in the area and that sort of thing. And I looked over, and it was a gigantic buck who had been bathing himself, who was startled by me and erupted out of the water. And I just felt a connection that was so strong. And in the light of the loss of my father, the impending loss of my father, and that example of just, I don't know, I felt like it was a sign, a message to me. All right. So right there was a change. Anyway, and I think that it was really through nature that I discovered this, because nature is ever giving, ever loving, ever compassionate. If you believe in the pathetic fallacy that nature really does, run parallel to your emotions and represent your emotions. Um, I decided I would, and that's when it changed, and that's when I changed the course of my business. I went from branding to branding through corporate social responsibility, which has since been somewhat, shall we say, is now known as greenwashing, if you've heard of that. Anyway, but I went into that and really and worked hard at developing a way that capitalism could support nature, because I thought it was the most important thing. Gradually, I was able to transfer that sense of kindness and compassion to human beings, who, as it turns out, are part of nature too. But anyway, so that's how I got there.
awesome.
I was bred and born for the opposite, and I ended up there anyway. So,
Awesome. That's
I just
interesting.
I just want to say one other thing, that the whole, and it's, I think this is pretty well known now, but the whole thing of nature being based on competition is now discredited. And I think we all know that the species who survive and who thrive all have some kind of cooperation and compassion for each other, even trees. So, this whole business of it's all about competition, it's not. It's all about cooperation. So, and love
Exactly.
and kindness
Hmm.
and
Right.
care.
Awesome. I like how, we tend to project onto the external environment our foundational narrative, and we filter through our narrative the story that we tell in ourselves that most of us are unaware of. And we filter through that, and we're like, well, competition is great. We've been told that competition is great to win, win, win. Um, what do you call it in game theory? Is it positive sum? Oh no, zero
Ooh,
sum. Yeah, zero sum. So
zero sum. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
zero
Right,
sum. There's
right.
winners and there's
That's
losers,
right.
and
That's
you
right.
got to be the winner, and then
Yeah.
the winners are the ones who survive, who make it. And there is something to challenging yourself and quote unquote being in competition with another person, but you're in competition to me, under the umbrella of cooperation. I
Exactly.
am competing within the umbrella of cooperation, then it's a whole different ball game.
Yes.
Life is different. It can become a positive sum game because that competition tends to have a little friendliness associated with it. And I think that we can be more creative. We can do a whole lot more in that space when we are competing within the umbrella of cooperation.
Hmm.
Um, I love how you mention that there's two things you mentioned: the impact of nature, but I want to go back to impact of challenge. Because sometimes a lot of us grow up in environments, we grow up in contexts that are very challenging, that are there's a narrative, like the narrative that your mother suggested, that we feel that is um, that was harmful. As we
Hmm.
gotten older, we reflect back on that. But I'd say that we can use that as fuel for transformation, like you did, even if it wasn't your intention. You're like, okay, at a certain age, you're like, okay, let me look at what my parents said, and then I'm going to go back and try to flip what they said. No, it kind of happened. But I think that we can be intentional about that. We can reflect on our youth. We can reflect on how we have come to see things in the world based on the examples that our parents and caregivers and educators, um, what the role that they played and shaping our view, our story. We can reflect on that, even if it's awful to be on, just to be extreme. Even if there is viewpoints where like, whoo, my parents were crazy, and they tried to teach me crazy stuff. Um, and but we don't have to be beholden to that. We don't have to be prisoners of that. We can use that as fuel to mold us into something different. And that seems to be what happened to you. And it happens to a lot of folks. And I'm trying to draw some attention to that because yeah, a lot of folks, if there are young people who listening to this, you know, life is hard. It sucks sometimes. There are things that happen to us, and there are, a lot of people have had not so great parents, unfortunately. And but it doesn't have to define you. You can change, you can grow out of that. It may take work, like you said. That's another thing you mentioned, that it's taking you some work, some effort to transform your narrative. And but it's still possible. You're here. You are at this stage of your life. Like, yeah, this is great. I'm living a good life, and it wasn't easy for you to get to a place where you can say this. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Yes, I had the advantage of not knowing that this is where I wanted to end up, and so by keeping the blinders on, um, I was able to not be dissatisfied with my life as it was when I was in
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody's 20s just suck, but my 30s were great. My 40s were great. I mean, there was a long period of time that was really very good and positive, and I was not distressed. I think that in order to get to the next level, you have to go through some real pain, and I think that's pretty universal.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through that pain in 2008 when the entire world collapsed, the entire financial world collapsed, and I was living in New York City, and the headlines on like the Daily News, all capital letters, Armageddon. I mean, how do you? Something has to change in that environment, and my business was flattened. There was no hope. I tried everything. It was clear that it was over. And isn't that great? Now I can be the writer that I was going to be when I retired just 10 years early, and everything was going to be perfect. Um, and then I realized that a lot more had to change, and in part, my values, my what did you call them? My virtues, my no, yeah, well, both had to change. I had to
Mm-hmm.
value it, and then it had to be ascribed to me. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so like everybody, there's some traumatic experience that forces you to go to move on to the next level. Because why would you do it if you were comfortable and everything was going great? Why would you change anything? So it's a so the negative is the biggest positive in my opinion. And it was hard. It took a long time, it was hard.
Mhm. Yeah, suffering is, various traditions. People just say, usually refer to the Buddha saying this, but suffering is a part of life. Challenge is a part of life. It's inevitable. But sometimes we go through really traumatic experiences. That
Mhm.
shock, and that shock to the system forces us to look, to observe, to see what is going on here. What have I been doing?
Yeah.
I
Yes,
thought I was doing the
exactly.
right thing.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to help the world be a better place. And this
Yeah.
thing happens to you, and that shock to the system, it forces us to be reflective. And I think that's a good thing. If you survive the shock, it forces you to be reflective. I think that it's inevitable. We're going to have these shocks in our lives, but I think we can still be reflective without the shock, and at least the major shocks. But these little minor things that happen in our lives, I think there are opportunities to be reflective, and even without those, to be reflective. I think there's, I mean, one of the central purposes of this podcast is to encourage that reflection, to be reflective on our lives and be reflective on the stories that we tell ourselves, and to be reflective about where did that story come from. And hearing your story about the way you were, at least one way, one aspect of it, that you got from your mother, that helped you along to some capacity, I suppose. Um, and because I think there to be, to be honest, I don't disagree. I disagree with the idea that kindness is weakness, but
Yeah,
I
I do
can
too.
glean, something from what she was trying to say. I think that there's a kernel of truth in that, um, and I think that maybe I'm going to suspect that that kernel of truth is if we overly focus our attention on somebody else, for instance, let's say a kindness towards another person. And I think it's a misguided concept of kindness, is that when we become codependent, when we feel like we need to, uh, how do I say this? Let me be careful with my words here. When we, so this is, I'm meaning overly do something. When we overly try to be protective of someone because we care about them so much, or we try to do good in the world in a way that is selfish, and we are attached to the outcome of the goodness that we do, that is the problem. That is weakness, is that if I want to love you, Carol, so that you can love me back,
Oh yeah.
and I'm attached to you loving me back. And if
Right.
you don't love me back, I'm going to be destroyed inside. To me, I can glean that from what your mother was saying. That, like, well, the problem is not the love. The problem is, or the kind act. The problem is I am attached to the outcome of your, or that person's response. So to me, to be kind for kindness sake is not weakness, that's strength. But to be kind or to be loving for the sake of some response that I want from someone else, of course that's weakness.
Yeah.
Of course I'm setting myself up for unnecessary suffering. So I can try to pull something out of what she was saying, but I still disagree with the overall statement because I don't see kindness. Kindness is not the problem. The problem is my attachment to the outcome of my kindness.
Hmm.
And then because we have no idea how anybody is going to respond to the things that we do in the world, even if we have the best intentions. So it's better to
Very
do it
true.
for its own sake than to cling to a result that we're looking for and then blame love or kindness on it. Like, no, no, no. Love or kindness wasn't the problem.
Hmm.
Compassion is not the problem. The problem is that you want that person, in terms of relating to another person, you want that individual to give you something that they can't at the time or not willing to do. And then that's the problem because our expectations of others. Is that does that make sense to you?
It does. It's not pertinent to my mother, but yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it was something that I struggled with. I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody in their 20s trying to figure out what love is about struggles with it. I read that book, The Road Less Traveled.
Mm-hmm.
My When I was heartbroken yet again, my stepmother drove down to New York from the property on the on the Neversink River in the Catskills, and put it in my hands and said, "You need to read this." And it was great. It said exactly what you've been saying. You
Mm-hmm.
can't expect that if you love somebody, they're automatically have to love you back.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what
Yeah.
love is.
No, no. Awesome. So you brought up another thing too that was important, nature. Now you said being in nature is was inspirational for you. It kind of helped facilitate a transformation in your thinking. Can you elaborate a little bit more, share a little bit more about the role that nature plays in living well? Because I mean, you did work, you've been writing in environmentalism, and you did mention that we humans are an expression of nature too, and it kind of helps you. We kind of crazy, but we
Yeah,
it's hard to look at us sometimes and be like, well, what kind of person? Why would you do that? But we are
yeah.
an expression of nature as well, and so can you just elaborate a little bit more on your take on the good life or living well in nature?
When I lived in New York, and I lived there off and on for many years, my dad lived there. I always he situated us near one of the parks, and I always, when I moved there as an adult, I always situated my family near one of the parks. Um, I learned to love nature there, and I used it. I would walk through it on the way to work, and through it as my form of exercise. I think, but I never understood. I never understood it until I moved out to where I live now, and I live
Mm-hmm.
near a forest, and I look out at that forest from my writing desk. You can't see it; it's right there. It has altered me. And after I moved out here, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, I had an opportunity to write for a brand new website. Just the board of advisors were all supposed to submit something, and I just wrote passionately about nature and its role and how absolutely critical it was to save it. And one of the early things that I wrote about was it's now well known, but at the time it was just happening that Japan had burned down or cut down all its forests to use for building and heating and so on. And they are now, at the time, I guess this is 20 years ago or whenever, they started building forests, planting trees, because people were being literally hurt physically and mentally by not having access to forests. And I thought that was so powerful. And here we are, in this state, in fact, in the Western Washington, we are trading off the rights to forests to loggers, where for the same who are paying not that much for the right to log it, and the same amount of money, much more, can be generated long term by tourism in the same way that Japan now charges for people to go to its forests. I think the whole nature thing, it's may have started when I was living in San Francisco, and I wandered in. I didn't have a job, but I should have. I was 35. Oh my God, I don't have a job. And I spent my days that I wasn't interviewing and sending out resumes and all that, wandering around the neighborhood. And I came upon this beautiful garden that was attached to a church. And I hadn't been to a church since I got married in one. And I walked in and discovered that it's called Swedenborgian, and it is a marriage of nature and the Bible. And this theologian, Swedenborg, went through the Bible and found correspondences in the Bible with nature on every turn. And I just thought it sort of allowed me to say, yes, nature is spiritual as well. So that sort of
Mm-hmm.
covers all of it. It's a business proposition. It's soulful, and it's spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I have to say about nature, and tons more. But
Yeah,
I will
and
stop.
we can spend all day talking about it because I grew up in a rural place, and I've always liked what we call the country.
Yeah.
I prefer to be in the country. Eventually, I'm gonna move back and being in a country where it's
Hmm.
quiet.
Hmm.
But one of my favorite things to do is to be in the forest. And I spent some time up in Seattle in the Northwest, and that changed me. I think backpacking and spending time out in the Cascades and spending time on one of those alpine lakes, camping by a lake, camping by a stream, and those big trees, the lush greenery, just transformative. The
And
quietness, the stillness. The only thing you hear is an airplane coming by, and you're like,
I
"Oh,
know, I
the
know, I
airplane!"
know. That square inch
Disturb,
of silence. You remember the guy who wrote
right?
that book? And the place he found it was on the other side of Seattle, on the other side of Puget Sound in the Olympic Peninsula. That is literally
Mm,
where he found that one square inch of silence. And that, I'm sure you visited that. That blew me away. And
mm-hmm,
actually, when I was still interviewing for a job and work on my way out here, I talked to a woman who said the reason she's a woman who teaches at Harvard at the both the business school, the school of government, and the school of religion. Amazing combination. And
mm-hmm,
she said that she moved out here because it's the only place that has a center of just exploding capitalism in the city of Seattle. And right across the sound, it has an explosion of nature in one of the only temperate rainforests left in the world. So it was,
mm-hmm.
I had to go see that temperate rainforest when I moved out here. And on the way, I saw Hurricane Ridge, the only place where the mountain goes directly into the ocean. I mean, all these sort of only
Mm.
places. Anyway, it's an amazing trip. And to do that circuit, and really, really worthwhile. And you get to
Yeah.
see forks for those Twilight Zone fans.
Yeah, you you get so much when you're out there in nature, the stillness, the quiet, watching it, observing it, sitting still in there. It affects you in ways that it's hard to explain. I know that there are people doing research and looking at the uh, mechanistic aspects of that and how it's affecting hormones and different things that are secreted from trees and plants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Great, go ahead and do that. But I think just running the experiment and going out there and just being in nature. Those who are city bound is very, maybe very difficult at first. Be like, oh, it's frightening. But just give it a little time. The magic just really unfolds. It's hard to put into words what being in nature and spending time out there really is. I think going on a backpacking trip, I mean, you don't need to do it, just a hike, but go on a backpacking trip for 4 or 5 days where you at least get 1 to 2 days without going away, just being out there in that quiet and that stillness, that peacefulness, it does something to your spirit and your soul, and you start to. I know for me, I was just like, well, this is important. I've
Mhm.
always loved being out in the country, but I'm like, okay, this is a very important piece of the puzzle of living a good life is being out in nature outside of humans.
The
I'm
closest
saying.
I've ever come to that is in meditation. When you have one of
Mm-hmm.
those days where all of a sudden you can feel your body feels warm, like warmth suffusing it, and just the joy is unmanageable,
Mm-hmm.
uncontainable. And that's the closest I've ever come to what it's like to be in nature.
Exactly. That's awesome. So we got nature, we got love, which I want you to elaborate on. We got kindness, we got relationships, yeah, and being reflective. So can you tell me a little bit more about love? What is this love thing? Can you elaborate on uh, how love illuminates your good life?
Well, you talked about nature being hard to explain. Love is impossible.
Right.
Um, I think that once it's interesting because there's the whole issue raising children of unconditional love versus conditional love, and that there's a role for both. And I think that as adults we're really cautioned against unconditional love, and said that's what makes you vulnerable, and you should never put yourself in that position. There's always got to be a condition. And yet, through my daughter, I learned that you can have unconditional love. And yes, you get batted around, as anybody who has a daughter can tell you, but the experience is so profound of feeling that and receiving that. And if you can find somebody who is also a lover, it is magnificent. It is really, it is a new kind of experience. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't say, hey, wait, back up, because we're humans. But just that experience is, it's like my partner says, um, yes, I will love you unconditionally, but that doesn't mean you could be an asshole.
Right?
so,
Exactly.
so that's the rule in our house. I think that again, I was very careful about husbanding my resources and my love, and not giving too much, and a very quantitative attitude towards everything. And with love, you cannot be quantitative. It does not exist in the quantitative realm. And I think the same is true of nature. I tried and tried and tried to quantify the environment for the sake of generating investments in that, and tying it to brand, and how investing in the environment will increase the value of your brand and all this stuff. And it really comes down to the fact that the most valuable parts of nature have nothing to do with what's quantifiable. I went back to the Japanese forest example, because that was what was to me pertinent in my waning day, my waning capitalist days. But the fact is that you can't quantify it. And I think that's one of the things that has been written about extensively, that we must take away having to quantify everything to have it have value.
Hmm.
And I think that was the demise of churches,
Yeah.
frankly, that you couldn't quantify the result of it. And I think that, except in their receipts, which were in many cases pretty obnoxious. Anyway, and I think now that there is no community, and that's another thing you can't quantify the value of. And so there's this loneliness crisis, and now the senators are trying to deal with that with government programs to cure loneliness, and when we had the cures all along in community, in
Hmm.
the past. So,
Yeah.
oh,
I was.
anyway, I'm sorry. I
Mhm.
feel like, a little bit like I'm preaching, but
No, it's all
that's
good.
that's as close as I can get to love.
Right. No, no, it's all good. It's your take on it. I want to say a little thing, say a little bit about this idea of unconditional love. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think unconditional love is just love for love's sake. But unconditional love does have conditions.
Yeah.
And I think that we failed. And the conditions are that I'm not attached to how somebody responds to my love. That's the condition. And then you can love unconditionally. Like, I can love you, but I'm not going to let you be an asshole, like you say. I'm not going to let you harm me because I love you. That's not love, actually. That's attachment. There's something going. I want something from you that sometimes people are not going to give it, not capable of giving it, and that's okay to desire love. I don't. I want to be loved, of course, but I'm not attached to it because I know that life has taught me, and probably taught anybody who's lived long enough, um, that the things that you want, you don't always get. And
Hmm.
particularly your desire to get something from another person.
Oh yeah.
This is, especially your ideal, because it's your ideal that you want from them. That's almost impossible. They may give you some of it, but they're not going to give you all of it. You might get lucky and experience that every once in a while in your life,
Hmm.
but to attach ourselves to that, it's just suffering. And so it's the problem again is not unconditional love. The problem is not love itself. The problem is that I want something back from my love. And therefore, in the conditions is not on the other person. The conditions is on ourselves. So I need to draw boundaries on myself. And the boundaries are my expectations, my desires, what I want as a result of my love. Boy, I'm setting myself up for disaster and suffering unnecessarily.
So you have to
Uh,
have the conditions on your love. You
Yeah,
can give unconditional, but yeah, I get it. I get it.
yeah. Well, when I guess it's we're playing with words here. You're a writer. You know better than I do. I can.
No, I wrote down some of the things you said.
That's caveats to everything. I can, of course, take that. When I say unconditional love is conditioned, and some philosopher can come here and tear it all up, but that's not the point. The
Hmm.
point is that I'm trying to make a point about words only point to what we're trying to say. Getting caught up in logical equations and all that kind of stuff is ridiculous. We lose sight on what we're trying to say. We're trying to use logic and reason to point to a way of being in the world. And I'm trying to suggest that loving unconditionally is just love for the sake of love itself. And the conditions are on our expectations of that love.
Yes.
And that is the problem that we generally have. And some people are, oh, love is painful. Love hurts. Love doesn't hurt. That doesn't even make any sense. What hurts is when you love that thing, let's not even say a person. You love your car so much, and then you wake up in the morning, somebody hijacked it and it's gone, and then you're torn apart because your expectation for the love of that car is gone now. You want it to be with you forever. And it's like, no, I just like my car. I love it. It's great for what it is, and if it's gone, it's gone. That's the kind of place where we want to be, but that's something we have to work towards. I don't think that's something that comes easily for us, especially when
No,
we put a person in there, put
no,
another human
I
being.
absolutely agree. I could not have done what I'm doing now at a younger age. I wish I could have. I had a boyfriend in college who meditated every day, and I think he was able to do that. But that's kind of a very unusual kind of person.
Yeah, especially when they're very young. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. This
yeah.
has been great. This has been a great teaser into your world, your ideas about what is good. I do have another question before I get to the final one. We are coming to a close. Because you're a writer and you're a storyteller, what is the role of storytelling in life, or in like, we can, if you can point it into, or relate storytelling rather to living well, what role does storytelling play? What role does a writer play in this? Or just storytelling in your own personal life, however you want to talk about it.
I harken back. I came from a background in advertising, and one of the creative people I worked with did an ad for Saab a long time ago, and it was a double page spread. One side was all the numbers about Saab and how what an excellent car it was, and all about the performance and the fuel efficiency and all that stuff. And on the other side, it was a picture of a car screaming through a turn. And I think that's the role of stories. They don't tell the whole story, the whole truth, but they tell the emotional truth. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is often the most important truth to understand. Um, Certainly in my life, I will tell you the other thing about stories is that as a writer, you sit down and write your story, and you don't know what it's about until the end. so,
Mm.
so I think that's interesting because the stories come out of something that's not at all rational or logical. You don't build a story; it comes out sort of fully formed, and then you figure out what the meaning is and what the theme is. So I think that's important too. It helps us to understand our emotions and what our actions mean and what's going on in the world means. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, whatever you wanted to share. Yeah, I
Right.
because I think that what we're doing here, we're telling a story. I think we're all telling a story.
Mhm.
We are an expression of a story that is constantly being created. I mean, we don't have the time to dig into it now, but you did mention creativity and the importance of creativity in this story of what it means to live well, to live good. But I agree, stories are, they elicit feelings, and that story is going to elicit different feelings for different people at different moments and different stages of their lives. And our own personal story is going to evolve and change, and the same we may tell the same story about ourselves, but that story has different meanings and significance at different phases and stages of our lives. And
It
but the important
changes.
that
It
yeah it, but
changes. It's
exactly,
phenomenal.
it's phenomenal. It doesn't diminish storytelling, because
Mhm.
storytelling guides our qualitative experience of life.
Yes.
It guides excuse me, it guides the soul. It guides this aspect of our being that's hard to put into this the subject. It guides this subjective aspect of ourselves that's hard to point a finger to. I use the word soul, but folks don't get caught up on it. I can look at different traditions, they have different
Yeah.
definitions of soul. But what I'm trying to say is there is a subject here that we all experience, and the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we hear, has an impact on that subjective experience. And all I'm trying to say with this podcast is to be mindful of the story that we're telling about ourselves, be mindful of the story that we're telling about the good life, and what it means to live well, and and try to shape and mold that story in a way that enhances living well and the good life, whatever that means for us, because it's going to be uniquely different for each one of us. So before we end, I like to ask this final question: is there anything you would like to leave the audience? You can summarize your ideas about the good life, whatever you want to say. Any final words that you would like to share with us?
I just remember that childhood story I used to read my daughter about the lupine lady, and she retires and she goes around the world, planting purple flowers everywhere she goes, and leaves it a little more beautiful in nature. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do. And I started in New York picking up trash just to make, in parks, just to make them so that all you noticed was the trees and the plants. And so that's what I'd leave you with.
Make the world a little more beautiful, huh?
Yes.
We can. I think we can all take something from that, and I think you, at the end, you open up a can of worms here about the beautiful and how important that is to the good life. So
Right.
Carol
Well,
has
or
definitely
George
mentioned.
Orwell and his roses, right?
Right,
Same thing.
yeah. So yeah, let's make the world a more beautiful place. Thank you so much, Carol, for sharing your wisdom, sharing your story, at least a little part of it. I know that we could have, you know, pulled a Joe Rogan here and been on this conversation for 3 hours. We're not going to do that. But I just really appreciate your take, your angle, your perspective, and yeah. Until next time, looking forward to talking with you more offline.
Thank you, Broderick.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.